Chapter 39, Jane Addams, Reformer in the Progressive Era. The 1900 census showed that America had 76.2 million people, 45 states, and a territory that stretched from coast to coast. No other nation had ever grown so fast. While most people still lived in rural areas, each year fewer and fewer Americans farmed their own lands. Many Americans had moved to the cities where they found jobs and opportunities, but also crime, poverty, and other problems. In response to these changes and platforms, the populace, who were mostly farmers, seemed to be saying, "Whoa," and "hold on," and "let's look at the old-time rural values." But at the same time, but the times were changing. America was changing with them. Peaceful reform and change are difficult in any society. When the powerful people in every nation were usually powerful because of the way things are. They don't want to see things changed. When William Vanderbilt canceled a mail train and was asked how it would affect the public, he replied, "The public be damned." Besides, change is unsettling for everyone. The important thing to remember about democracies is that when people are ready for change, it usually comes about. And so the progressive era was born. The populace had made people aware of some of the nation's problems. The progressives began to do something about them. They attempted to take the old rural values and make them work in the new urban order. For a while, progressive ideas were accepted by both the Democratic and Republican parties. Intelligent, able people got involved with their government. They became mayors and governors and presidents. They became reformers and writers and lawmakers. Progressives fought to see that children no longer spent their days working in fields and factories. They helped public schools grow until most children were assured of an education. For the immigrants pouring into the country, American public schools were democratic wonder, offering promise and hope for all. There was one problem the progressives put aside. It was the problem of racial prejudice. That was saved for later generations to face. Progressives attacked the problems of long hours and low pay for workers, the problems of business monopolies, and the problem of waste of our national resources. You'll soon meet the first progressive president. As you can see, progressive reformers were busy on many fronts. Many focused their attention on solving the big problems in America's big cities. America's cities in the 19th century were polyglot. A polyglot city is one where many languages are spoken. America's cities were polyglot because they were filled with immigrants, diverse peoples from around the world with their different languages and customs. These immigrants weren't having an easy time of it. To begin with, they didn't understand American democracy. Many had come to America to escape oppressive rulers. They thought of a government as an enemy. They didn't realize that in America, the government is supposed to be the people. That is why they often let city bosses control their lives. The boss answered their questions, helped them find jobs, and did other things to ease their adjustment to their new country. Bosses did do many worthwhile things, but many of them paid themselves for those worthwhile things by stealing from the people. In Chicago, a boss named Johnny Powers passed out free chickens and turkeys on holidays, so everyone loved him. Hardly anyone knew that he bought those turkeys with the city money that was intended for schools. Powers also used city money to buy a house for himself and diamonds for his fingers. Since many of Chicago's citizens couldn't read English, it was difficult for them to know what was happening. So when reformers tried to improve life in the cities, they had a fight on their hands. The bosses were popular. Many reformers were wealthy people who didn't live in the inner cities. They didn't know its polyglot population the way the boss did. Jane Addams was the best-known reformer of her day. She became the most admired woman in America. A visitor called her the only saint the United States has produced. Well, she wasn't a saint, but she was an intelligent, determined, college-educated woman who got things done. Addams' ancestors had come to Pennsylvania in the days of William Penn. By the time she was born, the family had moved west to Illinois. Her father, an Illinois state senator and friend of Abraham Lincoln, was a wealthy man. But that didn't mean she had an easy childhood. Jane's mother died when she was 2. Then Jane got tuberculosis, a common disease in those days. She was left with a crooked spine. That handicap helped her understand people who had problems. Still, Jane Addams could have a life of parties and ease. She chose not to. She chose to do something important with her life. She chose to help others. She bought a red brick house with white columns on the porch in Chicago, right in the middle of the slums. Then Jane and her friend Ellen Starr got to work with paintbrushes and rags and cleaned up the house. It had been built by a Mr. Hall, so they named it Hall House. All the neighbors were curious. Why would anyone live in the slums if they didn't have to? Chicago's slums were dirty and full of crime. But Addams didn't want to be an outsider. If she was to help people, she needed to know them. She needed to be a neighbor. Jane Addams turned Hull House into a place where people could learn to speak English, get care for their children, take painting lessons, go to a concert, exercise in a gym, or act on a stage. It was a place where they could get together with friends and take pride in their heritage. There were German nights at Hull House when German newcomers sang and danced and put on costumes from the old country. There were Polish nights and Italian nights and Russian nights. Hull House was one of a growing number of settlement houses in American cities. It was so successful that it grew until there were 13 buildings and a staff of 65. About 50 people lived at Hull House. Some of them were writers or artists. Some were homeless. At dinner time, the dining room might be filled with neighbors and political leaders and renowned philosophers. Addams started clubs so that working boys and girls could have fun and learn too. She worked to get child labor laws passed to make it illegal for children to work long days. Chicago built its first public playground because of her efforts. She served on the Chicago School Board and got new schools built. When children committed crimes in the 19th century, they were treated like adults. Few people understood that children's problems are different from grown-ups. Jane Addams understood. She helped establish the first juvenile court in the United States. The Hull House neighborhood was full of garbage. Garbage stinks and brings rats. What did Addams do about it? She got herself appointed a city garbage inspector. Then she got up every morning at 6 a.m. and rode on a garbage truck, making sure the streets were clean. Well-to-do, Gilded-Age women were expected to stay at home. Addams was breaking society's rules. That took courage. Settling down. Some Smith College graduates met in New York in 1887. They wanted to do something concrete to solve social problems. They established the college settlement in New York Tenement District. They didn't yet know about Jane Addams in Chicago. Stanton Coit, an Amherst graduate who earned a PhD at the University of Berlin, decided to use his training to help others. He came home and opened the Neighborhood Guild on the New York's Lower East Side, and later, with Lillian Wald, founded the Henry Street Settlement in New York. By 1910, there were about 400 settlement houses in cities across the country. Back to Jane Addams. That took courage is where we left off. She had plenty of it. She also had intelligence and energy. Maybe that's why she attracted so many thinking people to Hull House. A historian had written that the Hull House community was perhaps the most formidable group of intellectuals and social activists gathered in this country since Jefferson's dinners at the White House. Addams learned that reformers need to get involved in politics. That wasn't easy. After all, women couldn't vote or hold office. Still, she became active in presidential campaigns and in a world peace movement. In 1931, when she was 71, Jane Addams was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, the first American woman to be so honored. Let's read Problems of Progress. Thomas Jefferson had talked of America as a place where citizens are supposed to pursue happiness, but at the end of the 19th century, life for some Americans wasn't very happy, and often it wasn't their fault. The Industrial Revolution and the new capitalism had created a new kind of world, a wonderful world of new products and new opportunities, but no one was prepared for the misery and imbalance it also created. Mark Twain, the muckrakers, and others called attention to the imbalance created by the machine age and the unplanned growth of cities. Urban poverty was breeding crime and waste along with a sense of unfairness. But the problems of poverty and injustice didn't get solved. They would haunt the 20th century. In the 21st century, there would still be Americans going hungry. And if you want to read this part in the green, you can pause the video and read that to yourself.